Recently, there have been reports in the country of France that the three estates have been in much turmoil. The three estates are three different social classes: the first, second, and third estate. The third estate are the farmers, traders, and peasants, and made up of 97% of the people in the country. The second estate are the rich noblemen and lords, who, while only being 2% of the population, own 20% of the land. And the first estate are the priests and people of God. The turmoil has been caused by the noblemen, lords, and the king. They have not supplied their people with what they need to live. They have even raised the price of bread. After these past few years of drought, the third estate is not happy and would like an answer as to why they have not been helped by their peers.
Let's go.
This just in, there has been a storming of the prison known as the Bastille. It has been, it was a violent attack on the government by the people, which might signal the start of a French Revolution. It took place in Paris, France yesterday. The Bastille was a fortress built in the 1300s to protect Paris during the 100-Year War. By the late 1700s, it was used as a state prison by King Louis XVI. The people who participated in the attack were mostly made up of craftsmen and store owners who lived in Paris. They were all people in the third estate. There were about 1,000 men who participated. Around 100 people have died in the attack. Our reporter Aiden has more on the story.
People believe the attack on the Bastille will start another revolution. There were roughly 1,000 men from the Third Estate on the attack. Men from the Third Estate have been making demands of Louis XVI so that the commoners can have more of a say in government. They were worried the king was planning the French army for an attack. In order to arm themselves, the first took over the Hotel des Invalides in Paris, where they were able to get muskets. However, they did not have gunpowder. The Bastille was rumored to be full of political prisoners and was a symbol of many of the oppressions of the king. It also had stores of gunpowder that the revolutionaries needed for their weapons. Sujal is live at the scene. Over to you, Sujal.
As you can see right behind me, we have the Bastille, which as our anchor is set, could be the start of another revolution. I mean, seriously, how many revolutions did these guys have? I mean, the ways the captors seem to have used it hasn't seemed to have changed, except for that was used for royals and nobles. And I mean, seriously, what they should have done first was just clean up and modernize the place. I mean, just the smell of it alone makes me want to vomit. Let's go back to Spencer before I get on even more of a tangent. Back to you, Spencer.
After these past few years of drought, cattle disease, poor harvest, corrupt government, and raising bread prices, the Third Estate has officially started a revolution against the Second Estate and corrupt government. Currently, they're just protesting for the government to make a change, but recent reports have suggested that they may be coming up with a plan to overthrow the monarchy. While the Third Estate is occupied with protests, the Second Estate has started to protect themselves and the king. Currently, the First Estate or the Catholic Church have decided to stay out of this revolution. There's reports on a march known as the Women's March, which has men and women though, that has happened in the city of Versailles. The crowd first took over the Hotel de Ville in Paris, where they were able to get some bread as well as weapons. Revolutionaries in the crowd suggested that they head to the palace in Versailles and confront the king, Louis XVI. Let's take it over to Aiden, who has more on the story.
After 6 hours of marching in the pouring rain, the crowd arrived at the king's palace in Versailles. Once the crowd arrived in Versailles, they demanded to meet the king. At first, things seemed to be going well. A small group of women met with the king. He agreed to provide them with food from the king's stores and promised more in the future. After the agreement, some people left, but many stayed and continued to protest. Early the next morning, some were able to get into the palace. They went in fighting and some guards were killed. Eventually, peace was restored by Marquise de Lafayette, the leader of the National Guard. Now over to Diana.
Later that day, the king addressed the crowd from a balcony. The revolutionaries demanded that he return to Paris with them. He agreed. Then the crowd demanded to see Queen Marie Antoinette. The people blamed a lot of their problems on the queen and her lavish spending habits. The queen appeared on the balcony with her children, but the crowd demanded that the children be taken away. The queen stood there by herself, with many in the crowd pointing guns at her. She may have been killed, but Lafayette knelt before her on the balcony and kissed her hand. The crowd calmed and allowed her to live. The king and queen then traveled back to Paris with the crowd. By this time, the crowd had grown from 7,000 marchers to 60,000. Now over to Asher, who is at the site of the signing of the act to abolish feudal rights.
I'm here now while they're signing the act to abolish feudal rights. This act will change the taxes and privileges left over from the age of feudalism for the nobles. The National Assembly aims to abolish the feudal system entirely. Originally, the peasants were supposed to pay for the release of seigneurial dues. These dues affected more than a quarter of farmland in France and provided most of the income for large landowners. The majority is refusing to pay, and in 1793, the obligation is supposed to be canceled. Because of that, these peasants get their land free and also no longer pay tithe to the church. Now back to Spencer.
The absolute monarchy of France has been overthrown by the Third Estate. Many of the people who stood by the monarchy have been executed by a device by Joseph Aignan's guillotine, called the guillotine. The guillotine was considered to be a more humane way of executing people. This was the device used to remove King Louis XVI's head after the Revolution. Some people still like the old ways, so there was still some turmoil with France. Fear had rampaged throughout France because of anyone who gave suspicion of sympathizing with the king or monarchy would be executed. Some priests and churches refused to submit to the new government, and other countries sent men to France to stir up even more trouble, and feared that if France revolt succeeds completely, that they may be the next to fall.
The aftermath of the French Revolution gave France new freedoms, such as the freedom of speech, worship, association, press, and ownership of land. These freedoms excited the French people, but along with this, they got a democracy. Unfortunately, there are some bad effects too. After the revolution, the French economy fell, sent a majority of the people into poverty, but the French Revolution was still an amazing turn of events that led to the people's freedom and is considered by many to be the fire that ignited the age of revolutions. That's it.
Thank you for watching.
Tune in for the next major event in history.